Hello and welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival, coming live from our new hybrid studios at the Edinburgh College of Art here at the University of Edinburgh. My name's Nick Barley, I'm the director of the festival, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this cover design masterclass, which forms part of our new series called The Business of Books, which is aimed at publishing professionals and people from the literary sector. Today, we're joined by the UK's leading cover designers, Suzanne Dean, Creative Director at Vintage Books, and Donna Payne, Creative Director at Faber Faber. I'm also thrilled to say we're joined by Angie Crawford, Scottish Buying Manager at Waterstones, who joins us here in the studio to talk from a bookseller's perspective. Together, our speakers will discuss how to design a show-stopping book cover that sells and how to make it look good too. The chair of our event today is Guardian Books reporter Alison Flood. Alison also writes for the Bookseller and is a trustee of the Arvin Foundation. Thanks to all of you joining us online today, and also thanks to my colleagues Kate Seiler and Lola Bastanyaga for organising the event today. Over to you, our host, Alison Flood.
Hi everybody and welcome to the Cover Design Masterclass. First, I'm going to do a bit of housekeeping. First of all, this event is going to be recorded and uploaded onto the Edinburgh International Book Festival's YouTube channel after the event to make it accessible to those who haven't been able to attend today. And second, we're going to be taking questions from the audience after some presentations. Attendees will be able to ask questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. If you just want to chat and pass comment, you can also do so using the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. So, the reason for this event, we wanted to delve into the world of cover design, to focus on the process of how to create a show-stopping design that instigates sales from the briefing stage until the final version. And this masterclass, as Nick said, is part of the new Business of Books programme at the festival, which is dedicated to all of those who are interested in the business of the books world. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now and talk a bit about their roles. Donna Payne is Creative Director at Faber Faber, the leading independent UK publisher. She heads up a small but brilliantly formed team that thrives on delivering consistently excellent work across a diverse range of genres, often taking inspiration from Faber's extensive design archive. Donna has art directed many leading illustrators and photographers and regularly gives talks on book design at schools, universities, and library events. She is a passionate advocate for design mentoring and a more inclusive design industry, discovering and nurturing new talent from all sectors of the creative community. Next, we have Suzanne Dean, who is Creative Director at Vintage. She heads up the design team there, working on cover designs for contemporary and classic novels, amongst others by Ian McEwan, Mark Haddon, Virginia Woolf, Margaret Atwood, and Haruki Murakami. Over the years, she has come up with a vast number of diverse, memorable, and award-winning cover designs, such as Atonement, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, Sapiens, The Start of Something, The Handmaid's Tale, The Sense of an Ending, Entangled Life, and the Virginia Woolf Classics series. And finally, we have Angie Crawford, who is a buyer at Waterstones. Angie has worked in the book trade for over 20 years as a bookseller and buyer at Waterstones and Otakers. She currently looks after the Scottish offer for Waterstones across 27 shops and also works with the non-fiction buying team. And Angie's lucky enough to be in Edinburgh today. I'm now going to ask our designers to introduce two covers for discussion by way of visuals. They will each talk about the general process of a particular cover journey from the brief to the end stage and explain what they want to see in a good brief. I can't wait to see how this all really works. First, Suzanne, who is going to talk about Checkout 19 by Claire Louise Bennett, a new novel. Over to you, Suzanne.
So I'm just going to introduce myself very quickly. So as Alison said, I'm the creative director for Vintage, and that's part of Penguin Random House. Now, Vintage comprises of various imprints, including Jonathan Cape, Chatto and Windus, Harvel Secker, and Bodley Head, and the vintage paperbacks and the classics list. Now, nobody recognises me, but they might recognise some of the covers that I've designed. So here's a slide with a brief selection of some of them. Now, we get briefed on new titles every month, 11 months ahead of publication, give or take, depending on if the brief's on schedule. And I have about 30 titles on go at the same time at different processes. And then, that's really a lot of balls in the air, and it's all very finely balanced. My team also have about 30 titles on the go, and I have 8 members of designers, that is rather, in my team, a picture editor and a studio manager. And I'm just going to go on to my second slide. I thought you might like to see them and give a bit of context to my team and where we work. We have just moved offices and we're nearby the American Embassy. And in the bottom right-hand corner is the new entrance hall of Penguin Random House building there. And at the top left, that's 2 of my team unpacking. I'm a strong believer that input equals output, and we often go on group trips to galleries and exhibitions, and inspiration can really come from anywhere. So if you go down a street, see a piece of wonderful graffiti or something in a bookshop that strikes you, or a piece of textiles, we're always on the lookout for that. And invariably what we will see will resurface in somebody's work 3 or 4 months later. And I've never seen a wasted trip, and it's a really great way of building a strong, supportive team. And I think I'm going to actually hand over to, I'm going to actually talk about checkout 19 now. Okay, so good design should capture the essence and the tone of the book and be sympathetic to it. It should grab the attention of a bookshop browser, has to catch the eye and engage them, and it has to convey an idea very succinctly in a very small space. I think that's a huge part of the appeal for a designer. You have this flat space, and yet you think of all the covers that exist within that space. I think it's rather incredible. So a typical cover brief. Now, this depends on the editor. You might get a very tight brief that can send you on a route that you wouldn't have thought about, or you get an open one. So my favourite briefs are the ones where someone just sends me the manuscript and says, read it, then come back and we'll talk about it. But they don't happen very often. Now, when the publisher briefed Checkout 19, she said, it's an outstanding, brilliant, devastatingly original novel. Claire Louise Bennett is one of the most exciting writers of her generation, and this novel is one of the most beautiful and moving books I've ever read. It's a novel about girlhood and womanhood. It's about freedom and passion, about longing and desire, about relations between men and women, creativity and belonging. All the things that make us human, that pull us between opposite poles of life and death. And then she added, I'll send you the manuscript. And I read it. And of course, it was outstanding, brilliant, devastatingly original novel. Now, I absolutely love a novel like that, but I then think I've got to do justice to this novel. So I tend to read the manuscript, make notes, and collect visual references. I then create a mood board, and this is what I'm going to show you here. So with a novel like Checkout 19, there's so many visual ideas. A mood board is really essential to me. And I start by pulling out the themes, and I'm looking for the essence of the book. So I'm looking to, and I'm just getting my clicker here, to pull out the sentences that I feel I can use as a starting point to find the images. So there were lots of scenes about reading that were vivid and evocative. And the question was, how can I find an interesting photograph or illustration that conveys this freshly? I wanted to respond to this in a creative manner. Now, here are various different pictures of people reading and books, and memories were attached to books in the novel. And could the cover possibly feature a book? Well, I thought maybe it was rather overused. I'm just going to my clicker to go to the next stage, and possibly not human enough. Then looking back at the text, I realised that there were lots of colours that repeated, and the red, white, aubergine, and violet. And I wanted to take this on board in my design. Onto the next slide. And I was looking at the author's own words. There are so many things going on in this book, but it's a real celebration of the imagination and imaginative thought, which can aid us in all areas of our lives. And it's a celebration of literature, of course. What is a book if not harvesting of one's thoughts and ideas and feelings, equal parts light and dark too, like the book? So, of course, I was looking for imagery that reflected this with the tone and the colour. And then how to portray the major themes of escapism and imagination. And you can see that I've pulled out quite a lot of pictures that feature that sort of speckled, dotted feel. And in fact, that blue one of the figure falling found its way to a different book cover in the end, which I had just started work on when I was putting this mood board together. So there's a great scene in the book where the girl is doodling in her exercise book in class, and she made shapes, symbols and patterns and doodles intruded on nothing she could see. Then one afternoon, out of the blue, there came a few words at the tail end of a face. Now, I love this idea of the description of creation. So I explored, could the cover respond to this line? Could the design be typographic and some kind of handwriting? Now, there were lots of mention of white paper and white pages and white itself, but how could this make it a successful and impactful design? The main character visits Brighton, where she buys a long sequined mermaid-like skirt, which she puts on and wears out of the shop down the seafront. And I was looking for an image that I could respond to with this scene. And also, how could I convey herself? I don't want to give too much away when I'm putting together a cover. I don't want it to be too narrative. I want it to evoke the essence of the main character. And the desire to write spills from her fingers, and our fingers tingle madly, yes, just as if they're coming to life. I love that line. And I wondered if I could convey this joy and excitement, this moment of unstoppable creativity. So I started painting a black line in ink, and that's what you see here, which is actually being reversed, curving and twisting around on itself, moving to the line of the text. And I'm looking also for the tone and atmosphere of the book. These are really, really important and tends to be something that helps sum up the essence of the book. And then if I take you on, the mood board was done and I shared it with the publisher. And it allowed me to condense the ideas into visual routes and possibilities. So you get a sense at that point if editorial don't like an idea or not. And if it has a good chance to be developed. Well, this sort of normally saves quite a bit of time when you show to working up visuals. But as you can see, I worked out quite a few from that mood board. Actually, I have to say at this point that I think the importance of physical experimentation is really, really, really such a vital point in creating the cover. Inspiration doesn't just fall out of the sky, and I think like playing and experimenting, pushing things around, seeing what works is so vital, because often when you do that, something else occurs. It's like a sort of chemical reaction, and it can be unexpected and maybe more interesting than the first idea that you set out to develop. Anyhow, that's how it tends to work for me. So I might be cutting things out, moving them around, painting by hand, sometimes mood boards and sketches. You don't know what's going to happen until you actually sort of physically put it down. And there were plenty of options, as you can see. There were the dots on the right-hand corner, which seemed to be quite a theme. The hand painted swirls, they seem to repeat. And I obviously was desperate to try and convey what the main character looked like. And the red dot at the bottom right-hand side was the starting point for the very final cover, which I'm just going to click on now. That was the one that the publisher and I both said, it has to be this direction. And it's actually quite an interesting point in case, this, because I developed the cover with an image that when I approach the artist, heart in mouth, because you never know quite how it's going to go, she declined my usage of that image, and it's always such a blow. But then I had to search for the elusive replacement, because the author, the cover meeting, everyone had loved that image. And so you can see how many different variations I tried in the center of this design to finally get to the final image, which is there on the right hand side. And let's switch on to the final cover. And the image in the center, I must say, is by the wonderful Tina Burning, who was so kind. She let me use anything from her website, which absolutely made this a much easier search. And that's checkout 19.
Hi, that was absolutely brilliant, Suzanne. So interesting hearing the designer's sort of processes. So now I'm actually going to sort of kind of pick up from what sort of Suzanne was telling you about her process and talk you through a big project that we did at Faber, which was Kazuo Ishiguro's Klara and the Sun, which sort of published last year. Now, as creative director at Faber, just to tell you a bit about me, the main focus of my role is, of course, designing and art directing book covers, but my job also involves looking after the overall sort of visual agenda of a large independent publishing house. So I'll be involved in managing collaborations with organisations such as Liberty London, the London Centre for Book Arts, Monotype when they digitise some of Volpe's fonts, and of course, working with Wolf Owens on our rebrand last year was a really great highlight too. So I lead a brilliantly talented and enthusiastic team of just two brilliant designers at the moment, Johnny Pelham and Pete Adlington, as sadly the wonderful Eleanor Crowe, who was with me for many years, has recently left to concentrate on her career as an artist. So I'm recruiting a designer at the moment. And I've also got a brilliant studio manager, Paddy Fox, and a children's art director, Emma. So we're a small team. Now, when people think about Faber design, when people think about Faber publishing, they often think about the poetry typographics and our arts lists. But it's a very, very varied list in that we cover sort of fiction, non-fiction, comedy and music, as well as sort of children's books too. We do a little bit of everything. And so this tiny team has to be very, very agile in the way it designs, because one moment we might be working on a poetry collection, the next on a very sort of front list kind of, comedy book or something that's sort of tied into TV. And this is a year's worth of covers for our little department. It's about 360 to 370 a year. And it's pressured, but it means that we get very, very good at working quickly, not being overly precious with an idea. And this is one of the best but most challenging aspects of being a cover designer. As you saw from Suzanne's presentation, not being overly precious with one idea, actually coming up with lots and lots and lots of ideas at the same time, and then kind of filtering them through is kind of, really the secret of sort of how we work. And I thought I would just give you this little bit of insight here, which is our cover meeting. So back in the old days, before we got locked down, we would have our cover meeting in our boardroom at Faber, attended by sales, marketing, publishing, and editor. And we have this old-fashioned easel with an old tatty bit of cardboard on it, which when I joined the company 15 years ago, this bit of board was in play then. People are very nostalgic about this board. I suggested replacing it many, many years ago, and the response was just so visceral. I didn't suggest it again. People somehow really like the kind of the charm of the fact that it's always there, sort of in the cupboard. And it kind of fits perfectly, sort of 5 covers, which I really like. So generally for a first round of roughs, let's say I'd like to show about 3 to 5 covers, and I'll spend time with the team in advance editing, sometimes 4 or 5 times as many roughs. As you saw with Suzanne, we come up with lots and lots of ideas first, and we'll discuss in our kind of creative meeting the market, the main retailers, whether it answers the brief, and we'll agree amongst ourselves, kind of showing what the range will be that we show to the rest of the cover team. And my own creative process starts with reading the book as much as possible and a written brief. And by the time I start work, I will have heard the book discussed several times at various publishing and planning meetings. I'll explore the market if the book fits neatly into a genre, or discuss the core market with the editor. Personally, I find that in exploring different routes, the successful cover tends to be either my first concept, which I've laboured over for days or maybe even weeks, or my last sort of quickly rushed through concept, which I've maybe just done as a last thought ahead of a cover meeting. It always seems to be that way. But in the middle, all those jackets tend to lead you from one idea to the next, so that, you know, they're not wasted. As Suzanne said, sometimes we just do kind of reuse them. So following an editorial pitch meeting, I'll allocate titles within the team. And the department's big enough to be recognised for its distinctive work, but small enough to allow us the freedom to build relationships with freelancers we admire. So that's a really nice kind of mix of ways of working for me. I really like working with external designers. I'm very collaborative in the way I work. And but it's also lovely to have a team as well, you know, and sort of develop that sort of house style. Sometimes work with an editor on a project to come up with a detailed creative concept and then sort of hand it over. It varies with every book. So where do we start? Well, generally with a written brief and a manuscript. Now, the brief will contain vital information on key retailers and ambition for the book. Sorry, this is probably quite small depending on the size of your screen. And of course, information about the reader. Now, Ishiguro has a very broad readership, as Never Let Me Go is on the A-level syllabus. And for Klara and the Sun, we had a brief synopsis, an idea of the tone of the jacket copy too. Generally, the bigger the author, the bigger the publication, the more straightforward the design strategy. As with a debut author, there's a lot more discussion involved in terms of where they sit in the market, and the cover has to do a huge job in breaking a debut author out. Now, the long-established relationship we have with an author like Ishiguro means we can be collaborative and highly creative with our discussions with agent and author. And the sun as a symbol quickly became sort of established. And you can see, I don't know how much of that brief you can see, but it says in the sort of, you know, in the synopsis and ideas, that this idea of the sun is, you know, is a symbol that's kind of used throughout the book. And of course, it's very sort of strongly in the title too. So, although we tend to manage our own titles, big projects such as a big book by Kazuo Ishiguro, I'll always try and bring the team together to produce a strong first round of cover roughs. It's always an amazing moment for me, actually, to see the results of our individual approaches to exactly the same written brief. And this is the work of the very brilliant Pete Adlington. Now, Pete was the successful designer for Ish, so I'm going to actually kind of talk you through that work. And in this first round, he's done what many designers do, which is to explore around a concept. So we have this concept of the sun and of artificial intelligence. And with a subject like artificial intelligence, we'll need to sort of take care to avoid it looking like genre science fiction when the aim is sort of literary fiction. So these sort of very early rough ideas will come together as a team to discuss which is the strongest direction. But mostly designers will move quickly to get their ideas down at this stage and kind of keep experimenting, perhaps move away to work on something else and then come back to review which is the strongest, or has, you know, which is the one that has most legs, which has the most potential. And often at this stage, it's filtering out to something that feels right. So these were the kind of the three covers that we ended up with everyone kind of working on this book. And on the left there is Johnny Pelham's cover. And at this stage, we'll begin the process of discussing the covers with the editor. Does it have enough warmth and heart? Is it inviting? Does it give you enough story or too much? The graphic simplicity of the sun as a circle, the shape without too much sort of detail. And if you have a very descriptive title like Klara and the Sun, you can actually get away with quite little imagery because the words are in effect sort of painting a picture. If the title is more oblique, the imagery will often need to work that bit harder. which is why sometimes when we kind of start on a book and the title isn't quite nailed, it's very, very difficult to design, because we're always kind of reacting to the title in terms of kind of completing the whole sort of picture, if you like, sort of, you know, for the cover. We will often sort of react to the title as well as kind of the tone of the copy as well. So at all stages of the big book like this, the designers will have in the back of their minds marketing, how the book might look as a thumbnail. We'll ask ourselves questions like, are we giving too much away with the detail? Is it original enough? If you didn't know this book and this author, who would you think it was for? And you can see here, like number 1 depicts a key scene in the book where Klara and her mother visit a waterfall, and it's overlaid with this circuit board pattern that hints at the AI sort of content of the book. Number 2, we see Klara's face subtly revealed through the rays of the sun. And with number 3, we've kind of taken that graphic simplicity of the sun that we were after, but we felt it lacked something and felt sort of too small as a book, not quite significant enough. And we often talk when we are producing a cover for someone like Ish about kind of, you know, it needing to have that sort of big book feel. So then, rather brilliantly, Pete sort of developed this idea of the sun, which we still felt we wanted to bring some narrative and story into. So we really kind of cleverly created this beautiful graphic where the sun is only part revealed, because we have the title and we wanted to do something other than just show a circle. And because even though we wanted to keep that graphic simplicity, we also felt compelled to introduce warmth, emotion, and heart. Ishiguro's writing is full of these things, and it has a great emotional depth, you know, not a sentence is wasted. And then with the typography and layout nailed, we played around with different colorways. Now, as book cover designers, we're constantly turning concepts on their heads in order to create originality and intrigue. And like here, starting with a naturalistic palette, blue sky, yellow sun, we then look at breaking the rules by creating different color combinations to just see if they evoke sort of different feelings. And here, sort of adding texture, etc., printing it on uncoated stock, that kind of thing, in order to just actually make it kind of more emotive. At this stage, we'll share with others to get feedback. We'll kind of finalize the font, look at legibility. We added the Nobel, you know, prize-winning line. We'll think about where the retail stickers might go. You know, we'll often think, where might that Waterstones sticker go? Will it cover the title? Will it cover the author? And we'll think about how it stands out from the shelves, what the other books and authors it might sit next to, and constantly sort of thinking about marketing. And so here is the final book and the end papers. Now, in the end, we did stick with that more naturalistic palette, just warming up this sky blue a little. But those other colour options didn't get wasted. They became the basis of the end paper design, the setting and rising sun. And on the final book itself, we printed the rest of the sun on the edge of the pages to really great effect, I think, which is a new sort of bit of technology that I think all book cover designers are enjoying at the moment. Now, with a big book like this, we'll often create other editions of a book when we are working with this level of sort of title, like the slipcase edition with a cut through. And as it's sold through the website and other channels, we can afford to strip it back, removing the typography from the front altogether, which is really nice, which is kind of when you know you've got a really successful design, when you can kind of start stripping parts of it away, but you can kind of still very much sort of recognize sort of what it is. You know, you've got a very successful and recognizable symbol. And as cover designers, it's always immensely satisfying to see our work used successfully in a marketing campaign. Those gorgeous alternate cover options that Pete created became end papers and then went on to inspire this marketing poster. And, you know, it's not often you kind of employ that sort of graphic with book cover design. Normally you have the jacket and you're selling from the jacket and you want everyone to recognize it from that sort of static image. But here we've kind of created this whole sort of visual language which just feels kind of, you know, incredibly successful and sort of satisfying to see. Now, with a big publication such as this, it will often spark an interest in the backlist publishing too, which has usually been designed over several years, over the career of, you know, an author's career, and briefed at the same time with a backlist covers for two of Ishiguro's most popular titles, Never Let Me Go and Remains of the Day. Now, these books have their own life, of course. We wanted them to tie in strongly into the hardback, into the new publication, in the hope that they would sit together on tables and create beautiful displays. Also, those books were published sort of many years ago, and there's always kind of new audiences for them. So, you know, we try and keep sort of books alive by creating new jackets, creating sort of new attention. So not all covers make for a strong starting point for strong author branding. And we thought perhaps that the hardback was one of them. We wondered whether it was maybe too spare, too subtle for a paperback. So Pete, who is a gifted illustrator as well as designer, looked at this lovely textural painterly illustrations that riff on key scenes in the books. We like them, but there's a wish for them to tie in even more strongly. So we introduced that little box graphic from the hardback, but contained within are images that bit more descriptive than the simple sun. And we had such great feedback that we decided to repack the whole backlist. And this is quite a reveal actually, because we've only just finished them, but this is the whole set of repackaged covers. Now, sort of talking to the author before embarking on the backlist repack, he confessed that while he was keen for the books to sit well together, he sort of hated the idea of the covers being compromised as individual jackets for the sake of author branding, pulling them together. But I think Pete has achieved something really kind of special here in creating really strong author branding with each cover standing alone, sort of very, very strongly, so that, you know, each one is a excellent cover in and of itself. I'm going to pass you back to Alison.
Donna, thank you. And what a reveal. They're amazing. Never Let Me Go. Wow. Fantastic. They all look brilliant. I'm going to pass you over now to Suzanne, who's going to talk about the cover journey of The Handmaid's Tale.
Right. Thank you very much. Those were fantastic, Donna. And I'm sure as many successful and amazing cover series have the effect of creating lots of other designs around the country and being inspired by those boxes. And we should look out for those. I'm going to talk now about the Handmaid's Tale cover. I thought it would be interesting doing this one because really it's about creating a cover for an already iconic book. So this slide here will show you a range of worldwide covers of The Handmaid's Tale, which is always very interesting. And some of these came after our Handmaid's Tale cover. Some of them you'll see is a bit like Noma lookalike. Some might even have commissioned him, I'm not quite sure. There's a range of very scary ones, and few don't actually feature the classic red cloak, which is obviously so iconic, this book. So when you're working with a classic, you're trying not to do anything that's been done before. So a slide like this is really interesting and very, very useful and informative. And of course, the thing about a classic is that someone will probably already have it on their shelf. So what you're trying to do is to create a desirable object that they'll want to go out and buy another copy. And I found out about this book. It was all very last minute. A vintage publisher, she came rushing into my office and said, there's a TV show of The Handmaid's Tale coming. It's only a few months away, but we've got to do this really quickly. She didn't give me a brief, but what she did do is show me some advanced images of the first TV series. And on the left-hand side, this is an early press release photo. And I thought it was so sophisticated, very stylish. And the handmaids from above with their red dresses spread out. I mean, that's quite an interesting angle on the Handmaid and for a TV program especially. And I thought they almost looked like flowers, and this sort of double imagery, white dots in the middle of the red dress there, reminded me of Noma Barr's work. Now, Noma Barr is a Israeli illustrator and artist who's based in London. And some of his work features flat colours, minimal detail, and negative space. This is what he's really famous for. And his images often carry double meaning. So I thought he's absolutely perfect for this job. I asked him to play with the red dress and white bonnet, obviously, as I knew that both were so iconic that we couldn't go wrong with that as a concept. And here's a selection of some of the illustrations that came in a PDF, probably about 3 or 4 weeks after I handed out the brief. And I particularly liked the fourth one on the top row, which is a sort of eye-like and also bonnet-like. I thought that was very strong. And then on the bottom, the second row, the first one with the keyhole, and then the one that we used in the end, which is on the bottom row, fourth one along. I thought that was fantastic. So the publisher and I selected our favourites, and I worked them up into visuals. And actually the type that you can see on those was Noma's type. And they were presented at our weekly cover meeting, which runs every Thursday morning and normally takes a few hours. And this slide gives you my perspective on this meeting, and it can get really intense. So I thought you would be interested to see all these people staring at me at the end of the table with these covers folded in front of us. Unlike Donna, who has a easel, we, in the previous world, where we actually all went to a cover meeting physically, would make up the covers and stand them up, and they would get moved around for people to comment on and decide what was going to work best. Everyone has really strong views on design and the cover meeting, and yes, it can go either way sometimes. A really strong design always shines out though, and the real joy with this book cover design was persuading my team, persuading the meeting rather, to go with a cover that didn't have the author or title printed on the cover. And my reasoning was that the image was iconic already, and this was a classic special edition, so we didn't need to put the author and title on there. And with the TV show coming out, well, everyone was going to know about this book. Plus, it's a much more desirable object without it. Now, sales really weren't convinced at all. And, as Donna has said, stripping away the type really shows what a strong, iconic image it was. It really did work. And I won the battle with the help of the publisher, Beth, who I really couldn't have pushed this through without her. But we won, and it works beautifully, I think. And you can see how they used it in their marketing campaign. And I just click onto here. The cover was actually printed on a cartridge stock, which gave it a simple matte finish. And the title lettering, although it's not printed on there, was debossed on the front cover. And then the red figure appears very small on the reverse, which you can see on the right-hand side there. We used the keyhole figure that you saw in one of the earlier illustrations. And then I took that keyhole figure and multiplied it front and back for the cover end papers. And the page block, top and bottom, is that rich red colour. And it all came together magically thanks to production and the printers. A matte sort of or paper finish really makes the book feel fantastic on your hands. As Donna mentioned before, it's sort of quite emotive. It was really, really important that the classic reissue, that the imagery would be very noticeable in the bookshops, and it was a part of the success of this edition, really. was the amazing first series of The Handmaid's Tale. And thank you, Elizabeth Moss, for her wonderful performance as June and Alfred. That helped boost the sales of this book, as you can imagine, and raised its profile. And then marketing and publicity, they were incredible. And I think that slide on the right-hand side at the bottom, that features some of them dressed up in some handmaids outfits, which they donned and went out at book festivals and also onto marches that's I think in Piccadilly Circus. So it was incredibly successful, this, and sold really well, and was an ideal starting point for the Testaments. And I actually thought, given that I was talking about The Handmaid's Tale, it would be very interesting to see how that success actually affected the Testaments. And this cover was produced in absolute top secret, and only a few people knew about it. I was given only a paragraph about the book from Margaret Atwood by the editor, and it really was just a starting point. Now, typically, I always read a manuscript, or at least a proposal or synopsis, before embarking on the design, because I don't see how you can do it without responding to the text. And it was obvious that I should work with Noma again on cover, because The Handmaid's Tale had been amazingly successful. And this, after all, was a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. So I got to ask Margaret Atwood some questions to give me a bit more of a steer. It really was only about 3 or 4 questions, and it, was just enough to start that communication between Noma and myself about how we'd take this imagery forward. And when you haven't read the manuscript and you just get a few sentences, it can be quite tricky to see how you're going to develop it. And I came up with the idea that we would have to split the front and back covers and do a certain double cover, because I couldn't see how we could incorporate the 2 figures onto the front in a successful way. You can see that Noma tried these. And also you'll be able to see that originally the colour tones that we were working with were blue, not green. It was only when the manuscript started to come in a bit more that we discovered that Margaret had now focused on a green outfit. And I'm just going to click on. So the book was unanimously liked in-house when I took it to the cover meeting. And Becky sent who's the editor, sent the visual over to Margaret Atwood and her agent, who coincidentally happened to be visiting her in Canada at the time. Now, there were a few minor tweaks and much discussion about whether we'd go with neon or not, because sometimes that can be quite hard for marketing to take forward into their campaign. But I thought that the neon would really help make it stand out in bookshops. And we had a cover. The neon was approved, and then it remained secret for several months, which actually, looking back on that, is quite hard to believe. And we actually worked on this design so early at this a process of the book's sort of life, that it was a gamble, and it did pay off. And it meant that we were leading the design, and the Canadian and US publishers went with our design, which was pretty fantastic too. And it's a lovely moment when the book gets published in a really big book like this, and you see it everywhere in the bookshops. And then when it came to the launch day, seeing Waterloo Station with the icon of the figure in green, the 2 figures actually repeated again and again all the way down the concourse on the digital screen, was quite incredible. And I went to see Margaret Atwood give a talk at the National Theatre, and then I didn't realise this was on the outside of the theatre, and the surprise of coming out to go onto Waterloo Bridge to go back to Waterloo Station, turning round, and then this view, it just took my breath away, as you can imagine. And it doesn't happen very often for a designer to see their book cover projected onto a building, but it was pretty damn fantastic. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Suzanne. What a book and what a cover. I remember that neon everywhere when it came out. I'm now going to ask Donna to talk a little about Faber Stories, which is a collection of short stories by some really big names.
Thanks, Alison. So I thought it would be interesting to talk about the stories today, because for those of you who are briefing cover design, I think the process of working with lots of illustrators at speed and to a tight budget is a really, really interesting exercise. Both Suzanne and I have talked about working on those big books and sort of the clarity of sort of message there, and it's like this sort of juggernaut sort of type affair. But when you are kind of reissuing, as were in this case, sort of stories or classic books, often there's a bit more sort of design freedom, because there's kind of the expectation. It's not that the expectation is lower, but people tend to be kind of a little more open-minded. So it's kind of a really great opportunity for designers to like really kind of, get their sort of creative juices sort of flowing. So so the Faber Stories were published as part of our 90th year publishing. And they are, if you haven't seen them, they're small format short stories by key Faber authors, past and present. Some of them are old, some of them are new, low price point, author-led, small budget. They were originally briefed to be typographic only, and this is partly a budgetary constraint, but partly because we were actually putting them out at speed, and we needed to kind of come up with a sort of format idea and kind of get cracking, get them through. And so here's a variety of kind of our first thoughts for a typographic take. And these are a mix of designs from in-house and from Luke Bird, who's a really brilliant freelance designer who used to work in-house at Faber. Now, we loved these jackets, actually. We felt that they were doing that thing of creating a really, really sort of strong sort of series style. We kind of looked at how they were going to look as a sort of a set. We're always thinking about how they might work in sort of bookshops. There was going to be sort of 20 of them sort of originally. But there was something about the fact that we were publishing these for our 90th that made me kind of feel that even though they were kind of little beautiful sort of selection of books, I thought there didn't seem to be a project where we were able to kind of, we were celebrating our Faber publishing, but it didn't feel like we were necessarily celebrating our Faber sort of design history, which is a long and sort of very successful one. So I persuaded our publisher, actually quite late in the day, to allow me to use them as a vehicle to do this. And so we suddenly had very little time, a very, very tiny budget, and had to think of a way of actually sort of making sort of a bigger splash, but within kind of a number of weeks. I think we had a month to turn around the design of sort of 20 books. So in one of those kind of be careful what you wish for, Stephen said, yes, go ahead, but they mustn't be late. And as always, when I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with a huge design brief, I sort of turn to our Faber archive for a bit of inspiration. And I kind of thought about how much those books just kind of evoked sort of joy, just in a kind of very, very sort of, Volpe designs just always just feel like you just sort of want to dive in. And that's absolutely what I wanted to do. I wanted to create little book jackets that kind of were really intriguing, really fun and interesting, made you think twice, made you want to kind of explore kind of authors that perhaps you'd never heard of. So sticking with that theme, and because it was our 90th, I wanted to, even though I decided we shouldn't sort of stay sort of typographic. I didn't want them to look like they came from the archive. I wanted them to feel fresh and new. But we decided to use two archive fonts, designed by Volpe, which is Albertus Nova and Volpe Pegasus. And the next stage was to kind of think about a limited palette that we would use. Just to say again, we were kind of turning these jackets around in a month. So really the best way of kind of achieving this is to kind of really create some rules for yourself that allow you sort of creative freedom, but with kind of some limits in place, so you're not constantly making decisions about colours or fonts, that kind of thing. Next came the grid. Now, what we tend to do when we're embarking on a big series style like this, sorry, this slide's got a little bit squished. The books are a slightly squarer format than this. We kind of thought about what it was we were trying to achieve, and what we wanted was for each cover to have like immediate impact. And so we decided to kind of put the type in the sort of the top in the corners and allow for a big area in the middle for sort of imagery. Now, we had the creative freedom to allocate illustrators and designers as we wished, which is often not the case. And although the whole department was involved in the series template, this was designed and project led by one of our lead senior designers, Johnny Pelham. And our internal brief, given, bearing in mind timing, budget, was to match illustrators and authors you wouldn't expect. So then we took it a step further and simply handed over the short story with no visual ideas from us at all to these illustrators and designers. Because we were celebrating our 90th, we also really wanted to kind of celebrate all the people that we'd worked with before. So we had every sort of Faber designer, past and present, kind of work on a title. We knew this was a rare chance to let creatives interpret a brief with no market conditions attached. Now, the artwork supply could be a piece of type, an illustration, or any graphic interpretation. And although we deliberately went for a mix of creators, it was a surprise every single time. John Gray, Pete Addington, Tree, Anna Morrison, etc. They've all got very strongly developed illustrative styles, but as they work primarily as graphic designers, we were surprised by how many type designers came back with illustration, for example. So the Akhil Sharma, can we make that slide a little bit bigger? Thank you, Brendan. The Akhil Sharma cover there with the lovely juicy bum bottom left is mine. And it was great to match, for example, comic book illustrator Woodrow Phoenix with Booker Prize winner Anna Burns. Branding designer, sci-fi fan Steve Lloyd, we commissioned him to create something for Brian Aldiss because we thought, how would it be to ask a branding designer to design a book cover? And it was just brilliant to see the variety of work that came back. Charlotte Agar, who created the Mary Ventura Sylvia Path, and Maria Medham, who created Shanti Vikram Chandra, both contributed loads of fascinating ideas that I think knocked the editors sideways slightly, but by mediating between them both, we got to covers that seemed to satisfy everyone. Now McCormack's was a slow burn that we didn't tamper with at all. Initially, we were unsure about the largeness of the face for the Sonny Liston there, sort of second row down in the middle. We thought about whether it was just too much, whether it broke the series style, but over the time we grew to love how different and arresting it was. Edna O'Brien's Paradise sailed straight through without any fuss whatsoever. And then I'll just show you just a couple of roughs here. Here's Charlotte Agar's roughs for the Sylvia Plath. And she just kind of created such a huge, just loads of work for us, lots and lots of sort of detailed sort of pencil drawings. But in the end, we really loved this sort of graphic simplicity, which we just sort of built on, just to kind of create a sense of movement with the sort of train coming through there. And then the fantastic Bill Bragg gave us two different perspectives we really liked, which were the two covers on the outside there. And then just as we were deciding, swooped in with the middle one, which we think is just genius in describing the relationship between father and son in such a succinct way, just seeing the backs of their heads there. So, after a month and after all those kind of successful kind of jackets came in, we just really felt that that sort of time constraint was to our benefit. It made us all very agile in making decisions. All the time we were thinking about how they would look together in bookshops and promotional material. And so the more covers we had, the more our decision making was informed by what was missing or what we wanted to make room for. So we were kind of rewriting the briefs, rethinking who we would give jackets to as sort of jackets came in. And I think the secret to good series design is, like the Ishiguro backlist, choosing your constraints carefully, then creating enough variety within it. We're going to hear from Angie about the covers that stand out in bookshops in a moment, but getting feedback from booksellers, seeing how the books are displayed is a really, really satisfying part of the job, as you can see here. You know, just seeing how the independent bookshops, how those big stores like Waterstones are kind of using the books to, you know, to great effect on tables or in dump bins, really kind of just shows that we've sort of got it right, really. And I think the success of stories taught us a lot about taking risks and thinking about the less obvious illustrator, the less obvious solution, which has been really, really interesting. We designed most of these at sort of the beginning of last year. And all the conversations we've been having recently about sort of diversity across sort of book covers, we really kind of did with this project think kind of more globally and really think about what, you know, it's let's not go for the sort of more obvious choice. So this felt like a really great starting point to us sort of working sort of differently sort of overall. I think Johnny did some incredible work here, pushing himself and the contributors hard to challenge the expectation on every title to really, really great success. And that was the last slide for that one.
Thank you, Donna. I've got a collection of those on my shelves. They're absolutely stunning set. I'm now going to have a bit of a chat with Angie, who's going to talk to us about a retailer's perspective. Angie, I'm sure those looked fantastic in Waterstones stores, didn't they? All of those covers.
Yeah, they're really fantastic. And it's just wonderful to hear the background to how these have come to the bookshop. From a bookseller's perspective, we're really taking from the cover design the mood and the feel of the book, and that's really important for our customers so that they understand where that book is directing them. And you know, we're looking at that from both a digital platform and also physically in our bookshops. We're also looking at having that discussion around the cover ahead of publication to garner excitement, but also after publication and that initial sales burst to keep the conversation going in different ways.
Brilliant. And Angie, do you have a collection of jackets that you're going to talk us through that you've felt have done really well?
Some of those, yeah. So what I've done is pick a number of books from different areas of the bookshop just to talk through from pretty much a Scottish context what we're thinking about with regards to merchandising and taking our sort of lead from the design of the covers. So I'm going to start with Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. This was a really fantastic book for us last autumn, which we really resonated with our booksellers and also our customers. It publishes in paperback next week, so we're really looking to see how we can restart that conversation with our customers in a different way. The design allows us to do this wonderfully. From a bookseller's point of view, you're always looking at ways that you can elevate the presence of the book, both online and physically in the shops. So Entangled Life publishes next Thursday. We are in our Waterstones Hampstead bookshop. The artist is going in on Tuesday to do a neon window painting of the cover. It's going to be lit up with glow-in-the-dark lamps, and that's going to be, you know, really, I think, appealing and talk-worthy, I think, for people seeing that. In terms of the actual physical display in our bookshops, you can see that each of there's 3 different designs of sprayed edges, and I think where we would see this in a bookshop is probably on what we would call a single title table. Because the design is so eye-catching, you can just imagine what they will look like on a table together. And then to create a little bit of excitement sort of online, we have a little video here, and we use this on social media just to create a little bit of fun. Which colour will you get? We have this on our website as well. So you can see how the design is really allowing us to talk to our customers in different ways. I'm using this slide, and this is an author, a debut author who was our July Thriller of the Month. On the left-hand side, you can see the cover of the book in hardback, and then on the right-hand side is the paperback cover. Now, the paperback cover is very, very different. Our fiction buyer worked really closely with the publisher to get that strong sense of place that comes through in the story. The book, if you haven't read it, the format is really quirky because it's all an email and text message between all the characters. It features an Amdram society. And the reason I've picked this is that this is the best-selling book of the month that we've ever had at Waterstones. And I really love how the font of the title and the punchy quotes at the bottom really bring that sort of personality of the book. And the cover has been a real reason for the success of this particular book. And literally about 10 minutes ago, we had the cover reveal announcement for Janice Hallett's next novel, which for us is a fantastic way to start talking about the author's new book on a digital platform, and then to sort of get that excitement going for when the publication happens next year. So I'm just going to focus a little bit here on genre fiction. So within the Scottish market, we rely and have a very strong performance within crime fiction or tartan noir. And one of the challenges that we can have as booksellers is that it's very hard to find a design from a book that stands out as different when it's merchandised on a table. It's quite popular to see a sort of theme where there's silhouetted birds in the background with a moody sky, a derelict house or a mountain. And so trying to find something that stands out is really important. So the examples that we have here, The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley, this published I think in January 2018, and I always remember when it published that we had customers coming into our bookshops and saying, "What's that yellow book in the window?" And it really pops on the table. It really stands out. It does feel really Scottish in its design, and with this particular design, the publisher, we worked with them to have bunting, little stag heads, and bookmarks, etc. And it was really successful. The next one that you can see is Pine by Francine Toon. This is a debut that actually won the McIlvanney Prize last year. And the reason that I've included it is, again, it obviously stands out within a crime fiction table, but the sprayed, or rather stenciled edges that you see on the side of the tree, this really made the book very collectible with fans and customers who just saw it as a very beautiful object. And I love this particular design because it stands out as something so different. And then finally, on the right-hand side, we have Edge of the Grave by Robbie Morrison, another debut crime writer. This is actually going to be our Scottish Book of the Month in September. And I absolutely love this design because this is Glasgow gangster, gritty crime writing. The writing is absolutely savage, and you really get that from the cover. I love the sprayed edges, again, on the side. And I think having a pile of that on a table is really appealing, but it's impactful on the shop floor, seeing that when you walk into a bookshop. And then just very quickly, I just wanted to touch on a sort of journey that we've had recently, again, looking at a Scottish series or set of books that are set in Scotland. The House Between Tides was a book that was published originally by a very small Scottish press as Vala Strand. And as booksellers, we knew that this was incredibly commercial for us. And it came back to us a number of years later through a different publisher. So we were really keen to work with the publisher on it, but we didn't feel that the cover was right for us. So it did nicely, but for the next book, it's actually the author's third, The Women of the Dunes, we had a very different direction. Originally, this cover featured a woman on the front with some cliffs and birds in the background, which we didn't feel was right and didn't give the contemporary feel of the book. Looking back now, I think Women of the Dunes possibly looks a little bit younger than what the actual readership is for this book. And so finally we have Alchemy and Rose, which has taken a very different style again. And this is Scottish Book of the Month at the moment. You can see again the sprayed edges, and it does really bring an impact to the physical look on the shop floor. I've popped this slide in very quickly just to give an indication of the different interpretations that we can have of one book or story. Charles E. McGarry, this is his first book in a series, The Ghost of Helen Addison. And it features, it's very much cosy crime. It features a very unique private detective who's a real connoisseur of wine and food. And it's really interesting to see this cover on the right-hand side that shows a sort of supernatural sort of feel to it, and with possibly edging towards Scandi crime. And then we've got the cover on the left-hand side that is much more of the cosy crime market. So it's just interesting to see how different covers work in different markets. So I think that was quite a sharp whiz through some covers, Alison.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I've not read all of those, and I'm really tempted by many of them now. We're going to have a bit of a chat with all the panelists now. We're going to respond to some of the questions that have been coming in from everybody. I wanted to start with one that really fascinates me, that's come in from a listener. How do you strike a balance between pushing boundaries and hitting a target market, particularly in genre? Donna, do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it is kind of having sort of a very, very sort of open dialogue. You know, I mean, publishing is, you know, for anyone who's in it, is all about relationships. And I think having a very open dialogue between editor and author, sometimes the agent, you know, and retailers too. You know, Angie's talked about that dialogue she has with publishers to kind of, you know, to really kind of know sort of really kind of where the market is at, especially kind of within sort of genre, but always to kind of push those boundaries, because as designers, if we're looking at kind of what's on tables at the moment and trying to kind of create jackets that kind of sit alongside, in a year's time, everything's going to look the same. Everything's just going to be a wash of, you know, I mean, I always remember that time when crime covers suddenly went from all black to all white. And you know, everyone kind of felt that they were being original, but they absolutely weren't. Everyone somehow had the same thought. So I think kind of, you know, it's kind of being brave, knowing knowing your stuff, knowing when you're being brave, you're coming up with something original, but also making sure that you're still kind of speaking to the sort of right customers and the right readers too.
Sure. What would you say, Suzanne? Would you agree with that?
I'd absolutely agree with it. And trends, never follow trends. It's you know, we work on books so far ahead that when you get a brief where it's saying, please make sure that you have a square panel and make it look like the Ishigurus or the Sally Rooney's with linear drawing, you know that when the book's published, you know, or 18 months down the line or something, or even a year, it's going to be either bookshelves full of similar things, or it will have moved on, that trend. But yes, every designer wants to push boundaries, and the thing is about being original and having that dialogue and being inspired and playing, as I said before, it's really important. And then if you can persuade people to take that jump, that's when the magic happens and something new, a new trend starts.
Yeah, there's a question coming from Ian, one of our listeners, which I think kind of fits into that a bit. How do you manage author expectations around designs? Suzanne, is that something that you guys would have to do? Or would that fall to the editor anyway?
Well, the editor mostly is the person who has contact with the author. I'm very aware that the author has spent a long time writing this book. It's their baby. It's not surprising that they care greatly about what's going to be on the cover. And I like an author who's happy at the end of it. At the same time, I want to create something that will really sell that book for them. And for the company that we work with, obviously, that's our job. And so you have to carefully tread the line and push the boundaries and try to persuade all those people involved. It's like walking a tightrope, really. And you can have an author who doesn't like it, or the agent who doesn't like it, or bookshops that don't like it, and you can find yourself having to work right back to the brief again and start again, which is can be very depressing sometimes. But but when you push boundaries and the author loves it, well, that again is a magic moment, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It really is.
Julie has written in with a really great question, pointing out that independent authors, particularly self-published ones, go through this whole process by themselves. And she's found it really helpful seeing how professional designers manage it. But do you guys have any tips, Angie as well, for what indie writers should avoid at all costs when they're working on a cover? I mean, Angie, is there anything that in the book you wouldn't want to see?
There's lots of things, but I think what I would say is, Suzanne touched on this earlier, we're always, as booksellers, looking for something different that stands out. So when we're looking like on our tables, the book has got to do that amazing thing of fitting in with everything else that's displayed alongside, whether that's literary fiction or genre crime fiction or Scottish history. But it's got to also stand out as different. So, I mean, certainly within the Scottish market, we do have a lot of authors who are publishing themselves. And, something that I do is when I have some of these books, I actually just take them to our till point in one of our bookshops, and I leave it there and ask the booksellers to get feedback, and we give that feedback to the author. Some of it won't be welcome. And what I have found over the years is that things or issues that we might have around a book isn't an issue for a customer, and that always catches me out.
Interesting. Donna and Suzanne, any top tips for people who are doing it themselves?
Always make sure that the author and title can be read, and just remember that because a book doesn't have a lot of budget behind it in creating sort of finishes, etc., that doesn't matter. It's the idea that's behind it. You don't have to have a lot of money with finishes if the idea really makes it stand out.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. And I think just kind of getting lots of feedback as well, just realizing that, we all kind of have sort of personal taste in sort of jackets and everything else. And just recognizing that, people who are less familiar with your book may kind of see it very, very differently, and I think just asking those questions, asking retailers, asking people who are less familiar with the text, well, what do you think this book is? What's it about? Do you like it? And just kind of being open to sort of brutal honesty, I think, is incredibly important. But, mixed with a little bit of kind of trusting your instinct too, and not being afraid to kind of, create something that feels like your book and feels original too.
That's brilliant advice.
I was just going to add very quickly that, always have a look at what else is out there and understand what the publishing is looking like, so that you know what you're up against in some ways.
Brilliant idea. Now Vicky is asking a great question. This is one for the designers. Can you talk about how you approach working on a book cover for an established name versus a debut novel? I guess also smaller titles, basically. How can you make things stand out on a smaller budget? Donna?
Well, I think kind of the two projects I've just talked through sort of illustrated that a little bit. I think, you know, with a big name, you have a big name to sort of sell it with, and to some extent, it should be the case that, you know, you don't necessarily sort of need this absolute strongest book cover, because people will buy into that author, their favorite author sort of anyway. But kind of, so then the job of the jacket is to really kind of announce, you know, there's a big sort of literary event, but it doesn't have to kind of try, I think, so hard to sort of describe the story, to describe the kind of author that is. So with Klara and the Sun, you know, we were able to kind of have a very, very sort of simple sort of rendering, have a very, very simplistic sort of jacket, because we had Ishiguro's name on the front, whereas for a debut author, that jacket possibly would not have been quite enough to really kind of launch them and kind of put them sort of, you know, place them in the correct place in the market. So I think they're the differences. To some extent, it's actually much harder, I think, to design for a debut author, because it's, you know, it's kind of unknown territory, and to some extent you're sort of still sort of shape, you know, you've got the responsibility of kind of shaping their careers kind of very, very early on, in terms of sort of describing visually what kind of author they are, what kind of book they've written. So it's more, tends to be more difficult, I think, with a debut, because of the uncertainty.
I'd also say
That's
that
okay.
with a debut, sometimes you're given more artistic freedom, and something
That
more
is true, yeah.
surprising can happen, because very often with a very well-known author, there are certain expectations within other parts of the company that you might not get with a debut author. So,
Yeah.
you know, I really
Pressure
love
is
working.
different.
Yeah, it's a different one, but I really love those challenges. It may be more difficult, but you get more freedom possibly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got a practical question here. A couple of people have asked similar things. If you're using photos for a cover, or if you're using the work of artists on a cover, how do you tackle the copyright of the images?
We always would clear sort of permissions through the sort of correct channels. So with photos, that might be through a photo library, and we clear permissions kind of depending on sort of territory and sort of print run. And most publishers credit the illustrator or the photographer on the backs of the books or on the jacket flaps too. I think as designers, we take sort of copyright sort of very, very sort of seriously, and sort of, you know, respect that sort of intellectual sort of copyright sort of very, very much. So it's very, very rarely the case that a photographer or an illustrator would go uncredited, I would say. I think as designers, we always kind of protect the rights of sort of, you know, the creatives and suppliers that we work with.
Yeah. This
I'm
is a question. Sorry, Suzanne, carry on.
Yeah, I'm very lucky because I've got a brilliant picture editor who works for me, and that's her job. And she will search out these amazing photographs and clear them and make contact with these picture libraries that or museums and galleries, etc., or the artists themselves. But yes, we would always take it very seriously, clearing the picture and crediting the artist.
Great. This is a question, I think, for Angie and for one of you designers. Book spines. Angie, how important is it for a spine to grab attention? And Suzanne, I'll ask you, how much attention do you give to the spine of the jacket?
Well, I would always, I would always design the front first, and then I would isolate the spine and look at it and make sure that it had the essence of the front and clearly showed the author and title, because I think a lot of the book's life is on the shelf, and you will see the spine as you go around a bookshop. It's really, really important to catch the eye of a book browser when they're wandering around the shop. Just think about the number of titles that are out on the bookshelf. Spine out. Sorry, Angie, you go.
Yeah, very similar point, that as a range bookseller, most books will go onto the shelf, and it's a very small percentage that will go onto a table or a single table, a fabric unit, or a window. So the spine has got to be as appealing as possible. And I think you have to think about, is the book an individual? Because is it going to be part of an author's wider sort of collective works? Is it going to be part of a series? So the Stephen King Dark Tower series, for example, is a great one when they're all together.
Yeah.
In Scotland, the Muriel Sparks for the centenary, published by Polygon, they're numbered with the little typewriters, and they look beautiful when they're all together. And I'm thinking of things like the Penguin, most recently Penguin Classic Screen Ideas. They look so beautiful when they're all merchandised together. So it is a really important point. And I'm thinking that in September, our non-fiction book of the month is a wonderful book about Norwegian Vikings by an author, Kat Jarman. And we have got foil. As booksellers, we're fixated with all the finishes of a good design, and it's unusual to get a finish like that on a non-fiction title. So we've got some foil on the front, but the publisher has got the foil on the spine, which is so important, and it really pops when you see it on the bookcase as well.
Oh, lovely. Excellent. Dana is asking about how covers differ in different territories, and asking if local publishing houses buy the rights for the covers, and why a book might be different in the US and the UK. If Donna, maybe you could say a few words to explain that, please.
Yeah, that's quite a big question, actually. Yeah, I mean, it's endlessly fascinating, as you saw from Suzanne's presentation, all the different covers for Handmaid's Tale. And it's just quite simply, you know, within each sort of territory, the audience is different in terms of what they will respond to sort of visually. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant when you come up with a cover design that we then sell the rights to in kind of lots of different countries, because you know that you've created something that has that very broad sort of mass appeal. And that's often the case with cover solutions that are concepts rather than actual just sort of kind of pretty covers, if you like. But that kind of very, very rarely happens. You know, it's just the case that different countries will have different sensibilities in regards to fonts. Cover designers such as myself and Suzanne, or, you know, established cover designers can sort of spot an American jacket a mile off somehow, just because of the sort of fonts they use and the balance of type and image. It's just kind of quite different. In the UK, we tend to be kind of much more commercial in our approach to cover design. So actually we'll kind of go sort of more, you know, they're generally kind of more obvious, a bit more sort of splashy. Whereas in France, it's very, very common to see jackets that are just kind of sort of typographic. So like, for example, with Leila Slimani, when we published her book, you know, we went from kind of a very, very kind of, you know, a very literary typographic cover to something kind of photographic sort of for our territory. But, you know, that might be completely the other way around. So it's always nice when we sell our jackets into other territories. It really, really is. But often, yeah, they're just sort of not suitable.
Yeah, interesting. Well, guys, I feel like we could go on talking for hours. I'm fascinated by what you've all told me, and it's so wonderful to listen to people talking with such passion and such brilliance about what they do. I'm definitely going to be looking much harder at the book jackets I pick up from now on. But I think we've already gone a little over time, so I think we're going to wrap up there. So I just want to thank you, all three of you, Angie, Suzanne and Donna, so much for sharing your expertise with us. There's a couple of things I wanted to highlight before we go. Just to point out again that this event is going to be available on the Edinburgh International Festival's YouTube channel following the festival, where you can also see other events from the Business of Books programme. And I wanted to remind you all that if you've enjoyed this Business of Books event and you would like the festival to programme more events like this going forward, then let us know using the chat function. And there's going to be a short survey as well following the event, which we'd love you to fill out if you'd like to give us your feedback. So thank you again for listening. It's been absolutely fascinating for me, and I hope it has been for you too.